faculty at Virginia Seminary, and I am the director of the Center for the Ministry of Teaching. And I'm working today, a great privilege, with my colleague Kyle Oliver, who is the digital missioner at the Center for the Ministry of Teaching, a priest of the church, a recent graduate of our seminary, and we are so honored to be here. It's just lovely. We also have to be honest about the contexts in which we live. And I know that some of what I'm going to say is not going to be news to many of you, but it's important that we pay attention to what we're being told about Christianity in North America today. Whether it's our lived experience or not, it's what the public think about church. And it's often how the public are living. And so we really, as Christians of any branch of the church, are living in a mission field. This is a time when we are post-establishment. We are post-Christian identity being the principal self-affiliation identity of most people in this country, actually. People are still Christian, but they are less and less active in a confident way. So here's some numbers, just to remind us about how critical this is. 1 out of 5 Americans today would self-identify as religiously unaffiliated. So that means that they are quickly saying, you know, religion, I can take it or leave it. I like it when it's good, but it's not essential to my daily life. It's not that around which I organize my decisions or my way of living. It gets higher the younger we are. So 33% of American adults who are under 30, so that's from 21 to 30, that demographic, self-identify today as unreligious or not affiliated. What we typically now in the research call the nuns, the N-O-N-E-S's, not the sisters, not the N-U-N-S's, the N-O-N-E-S's. So some of these numbers have come out of a study that was done across denominations in 2010 called the Faith Communities Today study. And then they studied all of our mainline denominations, and then they also did some really good work aggregating the data for the particular denominations. So within the Episcopal Church, from the FACT study, we learned some pretty bold and startling statistics. Our congregations are significantly less healthy overall than they were 10 years ago. Now that doesn't mean there are not healthy congregations, right? There are some very healthy congregations, and I pray some of you are part of them. And they're not all big. Health is not directly correlated with size. There are some unhealthy large congregations. There are some unhealthy small congregations. But health, the vibrancy of the faith community, in terms of measures of financial stability, measures of recognition in the wider community, to go to the local convenience store and say, where is St. John's Episcopal Church? They can tell you. They actually know you exist. That's a sign of health. The fact that members of a congregation have a life beyond the church that witnesses to their faith, that's a sign of health. It's not all about the budget, although the budget is a significant factor. One of the things that makes the larger congregations less healthy is the level of conflict that they experience. If you look at the third bullet, there's a continuing high level of conflict in 2 out of 3 congregations. Now, this number has actually improved since 2010. There's research that was aggregated in 2010, came out after some of the major changes in the Episcopal Church around sexuality. So a lot of churches were really struggling when these studies were made. I think many of our churches have not necessarily come to agreement, but they have come to a place where we can live peacefully and go on about the call to be Christian men and women in the world, for which I give thanks. 75% of our, what we call old line congregations, so that's all of the denominations, the Presbyterians, the Methodists, the Lutherans, us, have less than 10% of their membership being young adults. That's pretty significant. We talk a lot about young people and the importance that they are to the future of the church. They're also the church now. If they're baptized members of the body of Christ, we need their gifts right now. We need their insight, their creativity, their digital savvy. We need their questions. We need all that they bring. Now, with that, together, we will become a healthy church. And 1 in 4 congregations has less than 50 people in worship. I think many of you know that experience firsthand. Again, there are blessings when we are small. When I served in small congregations and had a few young people, and I was technically the adult working with young people, the fact that I could get them all in one car was awesome. We could fit in one car, and if we got a little bigger, I could borrow someone's minivan, right? And we could go somewhere together, and we could have a conversation while we got there, and we could do whatever we were that is a privilege of scale. Now, do we want to stay small and only imagine ourselves as small? No, that's not God's abundant kingdom. But we have blessings in those places. However, if we think about health, we need to recognize that in our model of being church, a congregation of less than 50 people is going to have a hard time sustaining the overhead of what it means to be church. So we have to start imagining new ways of being church and new ways of inviting others into this journey with us. There's a scary set of statistics about how religiously illiterate North Americans have become. And I mean religion, about the quality of religion, what it means to think about the transcendent, to understand ourselves as one part of a creation that is overseen by God. 60% of Americans cannot name 5 of the 10 commandments. 10% of teenagers, only 10%, can name all 5 major world religions. Let's see if we can do it in this room. What are the 5 major world religions? Christianity, Islam and Judaism, I've heard.
Buddhism,
Hinduism, and Buddhism. Okay, 15% of teenagers can't name any of them. Now, as a Christian young person, or a young person growing up in a Christian faith, I hope they know more about their own narrative than all of the others, perhaps. But we live in a religiously pluralistic world. We heard that last night when we gathered with the teenagers. It is disrespectful of our brothers and sisters who walk in other faith traditions to not know something about what they believe. It is also not helpful to people of no faith tradition to not know our own tradition well enough to be able to talk about it and share it in the marketplace of religious pluralism. So, 60% of Americans believe the Bible holds all or most of the answers. That's good news. However, only 50% of adults can name even one gospel. That's called religious illiteracy. That's this romanticism of the scriptures. This idea that the Bible is there for me when I need it, that I'll proof text, I'll pull things out of it that will speak to me in a particular way, but I have no idea how those truths are woven together. I have no idea how they relate. Some people don't know that there are 2 testaments, much less the Apocrypha. You know, the canon of the Bible is not familiar to people. 50% of high school seniors think that Sodom and Gomorrah were married. Not bad, you know, make up a story. Those are 2 interesting names. Let's marry them, okay? You get the idea. But much more seriously, religious illiteracy makes it difficult for Americans to make sense of a world in which people kill and in which people make peace in the name of Christ or Allah. We need to take seriously our public witness to faith and our public conviction that we are hardwired for religious orientation. So we also romanticize the idea that, well, okay, so they're not coming, but they'll come when, right? They'll come when they have their kids baptized. They'll certainly come when they want to have a funeral. And then maybe we'll have a chance with the people who come to the funeral. Guess what? 27% of Americans do not expect a religious funeral for them. Now that's Americans, that's not Episcopalians. It would be a lot lower if we said to people who self-identify as Episcopalians and have drifted away even. They would probably come back for a funeral. But if you think about it, that's a lot of folks who do not see the end of their lives having a relationship to the divine. That somehow it doesn't matter that the people will gather around a narrative larger than themselves, that helps people in their grief, that promises eternal life, that gives them some sense of meaning and purpose. Now, I get excited about that. We're starting from scratch. This is a chance for us to tell a story about resurrection that people might never have heard, that might actually give meaning to who they are. So we also need to think about how open we are or we aren't to change. What this graph tells us is that it goes from left to right. The question is, people's response to the statement, our congregation is willing to change to meet new challenges. The people who disagree, so they say their congregation is not willing to change, are the shortest column. That's 17%. Okay? The people who say, yes, our congregation strongly agree, tallest column, we are willing to change to meet new challenges. Here's the thing, that tallest column is 48% of the people. That's the congregations that are growing. So a willingness to change, a willingness to discern prayerfully how God is moving in your midst and how God is calling you to respond to the needs of the world of God following the way of Jesus is in fact measurably correlated with a capacity to be both a healthy congregation and a growing congregation. That doesn't mean change for change's sake. That doesn't mean throwing out Jesus. That doesn't mean not celebrating the Eucharist. But it means thinking about how we do those things in ways that invite people who have not yet shared that experience with us to recognize its value. Where's our imagination? Congregations were least likely to say the following things describe themselves, and particularly their worship, very well. They were least likely, 4% of congregations were least likely to say their worship was innovative. 17% were least likely to say that their worship was inspirational. That's kind of serious. We, as Episcopalians, really value our worship. And if 20% sort of the folks are going around saying, you know, it really doesn't inspire me, it's boring. Why would they come? We know how busy people's lives are. We know how many other things are pulling at them and inviting them into their attention. We know how tired people are, how much they want to sleep in, how much they need time with their families. These are not bad others. We need to recognize that if our worship is just the same all the time, it's probably not inspiring. And finally, 23% say that worship is not thought-provoking. What's our three-legged stool? Religion? I mean Bible, right? Scripture? Tradition? Reason. The Anglican tradition is rich in the area of critical thought, of believing that we are gifted by God to be thinkers, that our co-creative capacity on this planet has to do with what God has given us as gifts for thinking about hard issues and engaging our scripture and our shared religious experience. And if we are part of that 23% whose worship is not thought-provoking, that's disappointing. There's a lot on Wikipedia that's more interesting than it. There's a lot in a massive multiplayer online role-playing game that is more challenging than some of our church experiences. So we need to be thinking about, what is it about our way of gathering that we take for granted that could be refreshed?
I was going to say that, innovative, inspirational, thought-provoking doesn't necessarily mean screens and guitars and the things that some of us, I work in a very traditional church, might sort of fear that it means. Those words mean, engaged with how the people of the congregation encounter God and see God in each other and want to bring their prayer life to bear on their life. So
it's rooted in discernment. It's rooted in listening to one another prayerfully about what it is that feeds our souls. And every congregation has at least one cultural milieu in which it thrives. Maybe many. Sometimes our services, if we have more than one service, have very different cultures. But we need to be authentic about who we're called to be. The question is, are we open to the possibility that what we are doing could be refreshed? Are we listening with one another to God blowing through us as the Spirit moves? So the reality is, the risk is that if we are not, we have a self-fulfilling prophecy. Edwards Deming was one of the 20th century innovators in corporate realignment, corporate restructuring, thinking about how do we do business more effectively and more efficiently for a new world. He said a wonderful simple line: your system is perfectly designed to give you the results you're getting. So we can only complain and whine and be disappointed so long about people not joining us, not coming in, not being enthusiastic about what we're doing, not giving enough money, whatever the knots are, before we have to look at ourselves and say, what is it about our system that needs to be thoughtfully, prayerfully tweaked in order to honor God, but perhaps meet the needs of the spiritual lives of men, women, and young people around us, in order to truly thrive and truly create a new change. The good news is that it's not as hard as we think it is. There's a book that's out quite recently. Some of you may have seen it. Some of you may have read it, by Lillian Daniel. She's a UCC pastor. It's called When Spiritual But Not Religious Is Not Enough: Seeing God in Surprising Places, Even the Church. What she talks about in this very readable, very sort of popular style reflection is that she keeps being surprised that people actually do want to go to church. They actually do kind of still think that religious organizations have something to offer. But they get in there and then they get disappointed because we don't hear their spiritual seeking the way they are offering it. It doesn't look and sound and walk the way we do. So they feel alienated. So she has wonderful stories about men and women and young people finding their way to God through the church, despite us. But then our opportunity to enrich their relationship with them so that they, in fact, go deeper in their faith journey. So this whole spiritual or religious thinking, we can talk about it all day long. They are not dichotomous alternatives. All of us have capacities for spirituality. And the scientists increasingly believe that our brain, our neural structures of our mind have capacity for religious understanding and for religious meaning making. So don't be threatened by the language, but be open to the possibility that people can come to know God through a number of different doors. And think about how our congregations, our campus ministries, whatever it is, our jail ministry, how that's reaching people in predictable and unpredictable ways.
We're going to structure our day today, and we've already begun to do this, along the lines suggested to us by a Christian educator named Maria Harris. If you don't know this book, Fashion Me of People, I commend it to you. Curriculum in the Church is the subtitle. And what Maria Harris does is, again, trying to break us out of this idea that faith formation and the fashioning of a people happens only during the time that we label Christian education. She actually says, no, we have a very ancient curriculum in the church, and it has, the church is marked by a number of different activities. And so what we're trying to do today is structure our workshop and structure our worship in such a way that we sort of highlight each one of these sections. What's great about Harris's work is that it calls us into this very participatory, non-expert process, the curriculum of the church.
The exact opposite of what we're doing right now.
Yeah, absolutely. The curriculum of the church is the church sort of doing its business. And so if we look at the, sorry, I've got multiple screens going. If we look at the 5 marks that Harris identifies, these what she calls curriculum, we'll call marks today, are the stuff that we do every day as the church. These are all fancy Greek words, but we'll translate it here. Kerygma, proclamation, proclaiming the Word of God. We're going to continue to do that in the next 30 minutes or so. Didache, teaching, that's obviously a big part of our day today. Koinonia, fellowship, we'll do some of that at lunch, trying to really intentionally listen to our neighbors as we are sharing lunch together. Liturgia, prayer, liturgy, this is the thing we think of probably most when we think about being the church, but it's only one component. And then finally, diaconia, service, the stuff that we're sent out to do when the service on Sunday morning ends. And so what we've done is we've cut the day into these little pieces, and so we're going to continue now into
Can I just slip something in? No, one quick thought. The reason we want to do this is because we absolutely believe, and I suspect you do too, that the mission of the church depends on us as disciples of Christ knowing who we are, whose we are, and what we believe. That if we are not forming faith in people of all ages across their lifespan as communities of faith, we don't know how to go out and be the church in the world, right? That we have to know what we believe, and it's nothing to be ashamed about, but we've done a really poor job in the church of forming the faith of at least 2 generations of Christian men and women. Many of us, and I'm 54, many of us had parents who did the right thing by getting us to church, but they didn't really know what to say about faith. My parents, who are deeply faithful, served on the vestries in every parish we were in, did all the things right, good people, never really talked about Jesus. We prayed graces, maybe at special meals, Thanksgiving, Easter, when certain guests were present. We had a family Bible somewhere, but it was probably the King James, and I didn't read it very often. It was big and heavy. We were Christian, we really were, but we were part of that group of people who, if you'd asked me before I went to college and encountered InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, I probably couldn't have told you a whole lot about the Bible. I dedicated teachers, and I was in the Christmas pageant. I did lots of things right? But it didn't all make sense until I began to reflect on my experience. Now, by grace, I'm still here. I believe what I believe. My parents are wonderful. My father's deceased. My mother is still wonderful. They still model faith for me. But the first conversation I ever had with my father about Jesus was on his deathbed. And it was because I had the language to ask my father where he was with God, and what he wanted to talk about, and what he wanted to pray for, and what he feared. I don't want everybody to have to wait that long. So we're talking about forming faith in ourselves and in those with whom we walk, so that we can be more confident as Christians throughout our lives. We've been told that Jesus came not to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. Our proclamation, our lives, our witness is part of that fulfillment. The NRSV talks about the significance of teaching, that we need to think seriously about how we teach what we know and what we believe. And this part of the scripture, this part of today's gospel, says there are serious consequences for how we teach or don't. There are serious consequences for what we pass on in faith or do not. Teaching others to do the same, if we are not doing it with love, and if we are not doing it with confidence that God indeed redeems, and that God indeed promises new life, if we're just teaching people to go through the actions of being church, the consequences in this scripture are pretty serious. We may not enter the kingdom of heaven. We are challenged to pass on our faith, to teach faith in the ways we live, the ways we proclaim our faith, the ways we serve the world. Seriously. So we're moving into the second mark of Maria Harris's 5-part curriculum of the church. What was the first? Proclamation. Anyone remember the Greek word? Kerygma. Well done. Okay, so we're moving into the second, which is teaching, didache. Teaching can come in many, many, many forms. And just like all of these parts that Maria holds up, we teach in all of those parts. We teach what it means to be Christians by the way we witness to others in worship, by the way we go out in the world. We also teach in formal settings of instruction. We teach in Sunday school classes. We teach in adult forums. We teach in Lenten series. We teach in moments of mentoring and tutoring people in faith. Those matter, but all of it matters. So it's really important for us to understand that we are talking now about teaching, stories of teaching that have serious consequences, that in fact come out of the lived experience of being the people of God in the world. And so we're going to try to share some stories with you from Easton and from the wider church that we think model the different dimensions of teaching that you might not in the past have recognized as teaching the faith. You might have thought of them as service, or you might have thought of them as worship, but maybe not thought of them as active laboratories of learning. So here comes some stories of teaching.
So Lisa and I kept joking about the sort of nested dolls of this presentation. So we're going to do this big section right here where we walk through all of Harris's marks and talk about the sort of teaching moments and talk about the practices that fall for each of these things. So we're going to backtrack for just a moment and talk about what happened in a couple of interesting moments of proclamation. So this is pictures actually from the church that I work at, which is St. Paul's K Street in Washington. I tell people that I work at a medieval Catholic church, and that is not far from the truth. But as we'll see in the story, that created some really cool opportunity for proclamation about what a week and a half or so ago on Ash Wednesday. And so and this was a big step for us as a very traditional church, participated in the Ashes to Go movement. And our community is very blessed in that the church is right on the outskirts of the George Washington University campus, and the local metro stop is right in front of the GW hospital. So that metro stop is like, I mean, at times it sort of felt like Times Square. There's a lot of traffic in that little area, just a couple blocks. I mean, we are, I think, well, one of the closest churches to that little corner, and we decided that we were going to participate in this Ashes to Go movement as a part of our parish's proclamation. And I just want to hold up a couple of interesting things about that experience. One, it was a way for our church to sort of get out into the neighborhood in a way that it usually doesn't. We do a lot of service in our neighborhood, which is Foggy Bottom in Washington. We do a great control ministry where every Saturday and Sunday morning we drive different routes and hand out breakfasts to homeless people sleeping on the grates in Washington. Like 5:30, college students come and work. It's a powerful ministry, but it's diaconia, right? And so this was a cool chance for St. Paul's to get out and do some kerygma, to do some proclamation of the Ash Wednesday message of our finiteness and our mortality and both the sin in our lives and our experience of God's love and forgiveness. So that was a really cool thing. Another thing that was interesting about this proclamation was I was struck by how many people came by and said to us, "Thank you so much for being here." This bit of proclamation was something that the people in this neighborhood really wanted. I don't think we put ashes on too many folks who then use that as an excuse not to go to church. I think we put ashes on a lot of folks who hadn't been to church in a long time, or realistically weren't going to make it today. And our being there didn't change that, but what it did was it gave them an opportunity to stop, to remember that it was Ash Wednesday, or to learn that it was Ash Wednesday in some cases, and to have that moment of encounter with God in a way that was so appreciated. Thank you was the thing that we heard over and over again that day. It was really powerful. There's an interesting gender moment going on in this photo. In the back, in the mitre, is Bishop Mary Ann Buddy, who is the Bishop of Washington, and she's standing next to the priest in charge of our parish, Nathan Humphrey. And St. Paul's is a place that has struggled with the ordination of women. There are parishes that are still divided about that. And that's a strange experience to be someone working there, I can tell you. But this was a beautiful...
With a wife in seminary.
Yeah, with a wife in seminary. And this was a beautiful moment in a way that the people there could understand and get behind and be excited about, of our bishop being with us and serving with us. And if you happen to see some of the video of Bishop Mary Ann out imposing ashes, it was so powerful. She is such a gifted pastor, and this picture captures it pretty well, but just the way that she just gets in close and has this holy moment, it was so powerful. And so that was something that was challenging for our parish, as was this very act, and yet, on the whole, people embraced it, and it was this empowering thing of getting out and saying, hey, we matter. Our very old-fashioned parish actually is mattering to the people of this neighborhood today. One last note, some of you might know Jim Naughton. He is the editor of Episcopal Cafe and is a church communications person and is a big advocate of Ashes to Go and helped the Diocese of Chicago promote the early efforts of that movement several years ago. And we had a tweet from Jim Naughton on the day of Ashes to Go, and I'll just paraphrase it. He basically said, I didn't think this thing was going to work for St. Paul's K Street. This is for the most part, this movement happens at progressive churches that are more likely to have guitars than crazy vestments like you're seeing on the screen, copes. And my wife was astounded that we wore copes. I came home and I said, yeah, I had to wear the cope today. And she said, you wore copes on Ash Wednesday? But it was this powerful thing of it was big and bright. There wasn't a lot of purple out on the street that day. We were hard to miss. But Jim's tweet said, I didn't think Ashes to Go was going to work for St. Paul's K Street, but you trusted who you were. And you trusted that, that your sort of Anglo-Catholic thing was going to resonate with people, and trusted that a moment of beautiful liturgy in the middle of a busy intersection in Washington, D.C. could be a powerful and transformative thing. And I got to tell you, it really was. We are still sort of flush with the excitement of this day. I mean, we met 550 neighbors that day. We handed out a lot of brochures. That's more people than St. Paul's Parish has met in the neighborhood in a long time. And people were really excited about it, and we're hoping to carry that momentum forward. So that, you know, bring your proclamation into your neighborhoods in whatever ways you can think of. Now, I saw
this example of charisma, of proclamation, fits inside the umbrella of teaching, of didache, is because there's all sorts of teaching going on in that moment, in both directions. The members of St. Paul's K Street, the clergy and the lay people that were present on the street, were offering in an embodied form the teachings of the church. They were offering the tradition of the church to people in an accessible way.
Our little brochure was a call to a holy Lent, basically, and it had information about service times.
So it brought the vocabulary that we churchy people take for granted into the public domain, right? It brought the possibility of conversation, dialogue, relationship. It brought teaching out. But listen to what Kyle's saying about what the clergy and the lay people of St. Paul's K Street learned from the public about how powerful it was to get out of their building in the true form that they worship. So they learned about gender again. They learned about witnessing to the gospel proudly and confidently and not feeling foolish. Coming home and saying, that was cool. We want to do that again. I mean, the priest in charge was very nervous about doing this. He was committed, but he was scared. And he went home from what Kyle says, and he said, I'm going to do that again next year. That was worth every minute of it. So the teaching is mutual. It's not that we have all the answers and we are going to proclaim them and give them and serve them to the world. It's that in the act of teaching, we also are learning. So there's a mutuality about that that is part of the lifelong journey of faith that is so important. So moving on, let's tell another story from your diocese. From Anne in Kokomo. At age 50 in 1982, I thought I was a pretty mature Christian and had little to learn. And then came Curcio. The unbridled enthusiasm and expressions of love and the desire to share the word hit me like a bolt out of the blue. I found myself developing more skills and self-confidence in sharing my feelings and listening to the feelings of others. I discovered leadership qualities which I didn't know I had. So in the educational world, in the world of formal teaching and learning, where we use big words like pedagogy, we talk about experiential learning. We talk about learning in a context where it is a fully embodied process, where we participate in our learning. There are structured moments of lecture, perhaps, but there's also the engaged message that we learn non-verbally because of how people treat us. When I asked you to move your chairs at the very beginning, or have the option to move your chairs, that was the teacher in me saying, if they're not comfortable, they're going to have a really hard time enjoying the day. Their basic human needs are going to distract them from anything we might offer that could be of use. If you can't see the screen, it's not going to be a good day for you. Those are practical ways that your experience can actually obfuscate or block your learning. So this is a wonderful example that for some person, and many of us, an experience of summer camp, an experience of Curcio, a weekend renewal movement, an actual living the story of the 3 days of the Triduum, the 3 days of what we call the end of the Holy Week, the process from Maundy Thursday to the resurrection of Jesus on Easter Sunday. That process came alive for this person, for Anne. That process has come alive for others of us in different ways. But we need to think about what are the multiple ways the gospel can touch us and give people chances to experience them.
And if I might just add, I think too that the fact that this is a program, and it gave Anne obviously some resources where she could act on that desire to share the word. And so we always need to be thinking about, again, like we said this morning, it's not easy. We need practice. And so things like Curcio and so many of the things we're talking about, give those resources for...
There's a curriculum for Curcio.
Yeah.
Retreats have a plan, there's an order, there's roles, there are jobs, there's a lot of work behind it. It's not just sort of throw it up in the air and let's try whatever happens. For some, that's too structural. For some, it's manipulative. Some people don't find that experience helpful, others find it transformative. But we need to be open to the range of possibilities that allow people to experience the teaching of the church, so that they claim it, own it, and then live it. And that's what this story shares. So, moving on, we are still telling stories about the Didache. Another version of teaching that I think is profoundly impactful in our church is the catechumenate. When I say the word catechumenate, how many of you can just raise your hand if you know what I'm even talking about? Just look around, because I want you to get a sense that it's not everybody. Just look around, put your hand up if you know something about the catechumenate. Okay, it's another big old Greek word, right? This is an ancient practice that was used in the early church. It was the process of preparing the unchurched for baptism and for bringing them into the mystery that is the Christian journey. It was a very intentional and deliberate process of bringing those people who did not yet know the good news of Jesus Christ into relationship with the church through a process of intentional formation and readiness, a rite of initiation, holy baptism, and into the walk and the journey as a baptized Christian. In the church, the American church in particular, there has been a reclaiming of the catechumenate. It began with the Roman Catholic Church in the 1980s, with the RCIA, the Rite of Christian Initiation of Adults, and it has been borrowed variously and with various degrees of effectiveness by our tradition, the Episcopal Church, the Lutherans, and others. It informed our 1979 prayer, the work that the liturgists and the theologians were doing about how we are gathered as the people of God, how we hold up the sacraments of the church, was informed by the study of the catechumenate. What's so important about the catechumenate is that you're probably doing more of it than you even know. And you may never want to use the word catechumenate, but I want you to think about the 4 phases, the 4 stages of a traditional catechumenate, and how they are critical to our journey as Christian adults and Christian young people. In the catechumenate, there was a period of inquiry, a period when those people who had not yet known much about the church but were intrigued. And remember, in many of these early parts of the church was under persecution. It was a risk to be a Christian. So the period of inquiry was people being invited to consider the faith that was, in fact, something that the government would actually oppress. So there was a real risk in being willing to say, I actually am interested in what this is that you have in your life that I'm noticing that has an impact. So this period of inquiry is building relationships. It's going to Starbucks and sitting with people and answering their questions as best you can about why the heck you spend any time in church. It's finding people at your soccer team or people who live with you in the workplace who have a searching heart and want to begin to know something about God. It's listening to their questions of inquiry wherever they start. It's a congregation equipping its members to listen and walk with those inquiring. As some were ready, then they were invited through a process of becoming a candidate, a liturgical act. They were invited into the catechumenate. And that was a deliberate process of teaching the faith. It was traditionally during the 40 days of Lent, and it was a period where the church mobilized with sponsors, with adults who were already Christian, an environment that gave these potential Christians the richest environment they could possibly have to learn about the faith. We can do that. We have, in our tradition, baptismal sponsors. We have godparents. We have you, who know something about faith, who can walk with others in preparing them. But we need intentional structures to support that kind of relationship. As I said earlier, it's hard to just start talking about Jesus. We need to be invited to do that. So what if your congregation created mentoring opportunities for those of us who are already members of our congregations and want to share our faith, people who are beginning to wonder about becoming Christian? Or what about people who've lapsed, who were baptized years ago, but would like to be renewed in their faith and might want to prepare for a different kind of initiation, maybe a reaffirmation of faith, maybe confirmation. But there's a period of intentional catechetical instruction. It can be one-on-one, it could be a class. Then we move on to the actual rites themselves. Primarily baptism, confirmation, reaffirmation. But there's a big old deal that we gather around these people and we honor their commitment to their faith. And here's the kicker. The catechumenate has a fourth stage, and this is where we mostly fall down. We are so excited when we baptize people. We are so excited when we confirm people. And then we say, hey, would you like to be on a committee? Hey, why don't you pledge? Would you mind coming and helping us on Saturday at the soup kitchen? These are all great things. I believe God can work in all of those opportunities. But that is not accompanying someone to walk with you through baptism and into baptismal living. That is not the continued discernment of what in the catechumenate was called mystagogy. This process of actually listening for the gifts God has given that particular person for ministry. So what do we do to walk with people once they've made this big deal commitment to support them in big deal living as Christians? How is going to work going to be different because they're baptized? How is going back to school going to be different because they were confirmed? How is going back to working in a difficult family situation where there's all sorts of brokenness and pain? How is that going to be different because they're now a Christian? We have to have those conversations.
It didn't take me long to become hooked on teaching VBS.
Vacation Bible School.
Other than hearing the stories in church, I had never read from the Bible. But there I was with a lesson plan in hand and the task of bringing the stories to life for our youth. To see their faces, hearing their responses, and answering their questions to the best of my knowledge was an experience I will never forget. Through these lessons, I found a deeper understanding and meaning of God and was able to share with fellow Christians in our community. So, part of what I love about this is that, Jennifer's been very honest with me. I've been in church all my life. I've heard Bible stories a lot, and that was pretty much all the training I had. But I got involved in this program, and I was asked to help teach, and I had some resources. Here I was with a curriculum and a specific mission. Help these stories come alive. And in the process of helping those stories come alive for others, they came alive for her too. And this is such a common thing in the church, and a great way to build on the strengths that we have. We have committed people who, if we can equip them, can do really great things, and it will be formational for the people they work with, and formational for them themselves. And any teacher will tell you this, that the act of teaching is a tremendous learning experience. And so thank you, Jennifer, for sharing that with us.
Another member that is another seminarian that we think highly of is our friend Becky Zartman, who is a senior at Virginia Seminary for the Diocese of Central Pennsylvania. And the next story of koinonia, community, which is a form of teaching through the experience of community that we want to share, is her story. And we want her to tell it to you in person because she is so vivacious and excited about this. Becky has participated in EFM, Education for Ministry. How many of you are in or have ever been in EFM? Fabulous. 4-year experiential program in theology and scripture, created and facilitated from the University of the South in Sewanee. It is an extraordinary program of formation that does all of the things we're talking about. Gathers us in community, brings us into fellowship, gives us a place with substantive content, a chance to reflect theologically and learn about theological reflection, to practice the words of faith that we might not have practiced. Becky's going to share with you her experience of this. We have nested this experience of EFM under the rubric of koinonia, of community, because we really see that the richness of Becky's learning, the teaching, was embedded in relationship. It was embedded in continuity. It was embedded in friendship that was sustained and enduring and transformative. She was able to learn about Scripture because she was loved by the people who welcomed her into that group. And she then loved the people in that group to know more about Scripture. And then she brought that joy to seminary. And some very well-meaning, very pious seminarians discovered, maybe it's not all about my head. Maybe I really need to think about fellowship in a way that is significantly different from what I understood it was until now. So the transformation is contagious in a really good way. And Becky is a good example of the fact that it's not about age. Her group in this EFM particular group was all ages. They crossed the generations. And she talks about them as if they're all peers, as if they're all friends, because they are. They're all walking the way of Jesus together. Another example of koinonia that we want to share with you that comes from your diocese is a very touching story from one of you in this room. You submitted a piece online that says, this person has a break from her chemotherapy regime this week, the week of the scheduled convention. We considered getting away to someplace warm and fresh and having someone else attend in our place. We then focused on the love that has been showered upon us by our religious community and the dedication of its leadership, and realized that there is nowhere we would rather be than in the arms of that community at this time. We have been and continue to be repeatedly blessed. You are that community. You call these people home. To come to a 2-day meeting, right? We are learning, we are teaching the faith by the way we relate to each other. So much so that coming and spending the first few days post-treatment together is a nourishing, hopeful place to be. We're going to move into yet another expression of teaching. This one, liturgia, prayer.
So I'm going to speak to you from the back for a second because I've got to launch a video in a minute. But what we're going to tell you about is a place called St. Gregory of Nyssa Episcopal Church in San Francisco. Has anyone heard of St. Gregory's?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, yeah, quite a few. Great. Well, St. Gregory's is a really powerful place, and I want to read this quote because it hits on something we've talked about a lot today, and it's good to hear it from different angles. They say, "We are dedicated to sharing the gospel through liturgy, art, music, and dance. Visitors in large numbers come from the greater Bay Area and from afar because of our unique approach to worship that is embodied in the artful and art-filled physical space of our church." So this is a community that celebrates the visual arts, the musical arts, and you get the sense of that when you look at their building, especially the inside. If you've seen pictures of the inside of St. Gregory, there's all these dancing saints. I forget how many of them, but it's quite something. And so again, just like we saw in some of the other examples, in their mark of prayer and of worship, St. Gregory's is in some ways doing a little more than sharing who they are with their community, and they seek out lots of ways to be involved in their community in an authentic way. And so
if I could just put a little, I was living in California, in the Diocese of California, when St. Gregory of Nyssa was founded. And if you know the adage, form follows function, this congregation came into being out of a vision that two priests shared for a church that would express first century liturgical tradition. They did not have the beautiful space they have now when they started. They built a community around a vision with a space that was not perfect for what they needed at all, but they made it work. And enough people were invited into this experience of being church together in this form that they ultimately were able to do what we all know how to do, a capital campaign, raise the money, and build this extraordinary space that is a form that reflects their purpose, their function, their vision, their mission. But for those of us in buildings that aren't perfect for what we believe God's calling us to do, you can still be who God's calling you to be. Don't let your architecture or your space confine your ideas. Don't let your imagination be stuck where the building was right in some year that it was built. But there's a great example of a congregation teaching itself and the world what it believes through its liturgy. That through its gathering, it communicates something that is not of this world. It is something of the divine, something of the hope of the gospel.
I just want to share one or two more comments about the video. One of them is, there's something about the enthusiasm there that is just really, it's just contagious. And I think that's something that we need to remember, is that enthusiasm covers up a multitude of sins. For those of you who are musically trained, some of that singing wasn't great. That tenor had, and don't get me wrong, I can't sing that high, but there was some pitchness issues there, and but the person belted it out and was enthusiastic about it, and that makes a big difference. You can tell when you walk in, as Lisa and I do often, to a church we haven't been to before, and feel that the Spirit is there and that people are enthusiastic and happy to be there. And you can feel when it goes the other way. And so one reason we really wanted to show the video was just to see that visual of just a bunch of people who are excited to be in church. And so that's one comment we wanted to share. The second is, we have a quote, so Donald Shell, one of the people involved in helping start that community, was...
Two clergy were Rick Fabian and Donald Shell, just to give them credit for St. Bernard.
Yeah, and this dovetails on what we talked about before, but when he was with us at the center for an unrelated meeting back in the fall, we were having dinner with him, and he said, I'm most interested in the times in the church when the liturgy was popular. And what he means by that was, was a part of the surrounding cultural thing. I mean, think about, Stations of the Cross in Jerusalem in the 4th century. Like that kind of thing. And you can see that the liturgy going on in this video is drawn from bits and pieces of those times in the past when the liturgy of the church has been popular, has been of the people. And, I think a question we should always be asking ourselves is, what would liturgy like that look like today? And St. Gregory's has one answer that, involves vesture and music and stuff from another time, but it works in that context. What might work in your context? And so again, sometimes that's, using videos in church or what have you. We can't answer that question for you, but the people of your congregation, and your neighborhoods and communities, and those things matter to the liturgy. I think is ultimately the lesson that we might take from St. Gregory's. They also do a great job of integrating their mark of prayer and worship with their service. And some of you maybe have seen videos of people coming in on a weekday for a free farmer's market inside the worship space. It's beautiful, images of just, tons of produce coming in to that round church space. And for the, homeless and low-income people in that neighborhood to be able to come into a church building and to walk around and look at all of that fruit of the earth and take some home with them is a powerful thing. So again, these things are all integrated, and that act of being at a very San Francisco-esque food pantry inside the church building, I find to be inside the worship space to be very powerful.
Very moved yesterday by Dee's presentation in many ways, but in particular by the acknowledgement that the Camp Wright staff and board now have about the significance of young adult ministry that's happening in that place. That it is a gathering place for young adults from Episcopal churches and beyond who have found meaningful life serving the church, the camp, the campers, and their families by volunteering or being paid every summer to show up and do what needs to be done to run a camp. That is, in and of itself, a form of diaconia. That's a form of service. They could earn a lot more money doing a lot of other things over the summer than they do working at summer camp. They also are learning and being taught, as she pointed out yesterday, more about the Christian story. One of the things that's classic in Christian camping is we get lots of young men and women who love teenagers or love kids hanging out together and sort of pooling their ignorance about the church. Like, I love God, but I don't really know anything about the Bible, you're right, but I love God, and we just love each other, and I love camp. And wanted to come back to camp because that's the only place they've experienced that. There's nothing wrong with coming back to camp if they're a healthy counselor. We need them. But we also need to help them form faith. We need them to have the roots of Christian living that will travel with them into their relationships, into their vocations, into their choices they're going to make when they're not at camp. So what I heard Dee saying yesterday is that they're beginning to build intentional teaching into the formation of their counselors, the formation of their volunteers, so that in this place where they want to come anyway, they're getting a little bit of value added. They're getting an intentional set of guidance from other adults, clergy and lay, who have walked a little bit more. What John Westerhoff, a famous Christian educator, Episcopal priest, says is a guarantor. Someone who by their very being witnesses to somebody else that they will guarantee that they'll get through the now to the there. A guarantor for us is someone whose life witnesses to us that it's worth getting through the dark night of the soul, or the uncertainty, or the big questions, or the my heart is broken because my boyfriend just dumped me. That person who's with me and reminds me that I will be okay is a guarantor. That's a witness. So here is, right in your own diocese, a living model of diaconia as teaching, as formation, as Maria Harris and we understand. One of the dilemmas in church is we keep going to the same people to ask for resources, right? So what a great opportunity for proclamation, for evangelism, for sharing the story outside your membership is to take that invitation out into your communities. People want to give to meaningful purposes. We can talk about how the church is involved in something global, something really important, and gather the support and the financial support from people who are not yet with us and may never be with us as members of our congregations. That takes some courage, but it's worth it. And that's a witness of the church teaching the world that we stand for something that is different from just a little club that's down the street and looks nice.
So ask your friends and colleagues and classmates too.
We want to do a little what we call digesting the Didache. So we've been in this section of telling you stories from your experience, from our experience of the greater church, that is our ways that we teach the faith through our very being. We teach the faith deliberately in classes, and we teach the faith in a more informal way in our relationships, our experiences of koinonia, in our liturgy. All of the gathering and sending us out is a form of ongoing formation. It's important that we understand fundamentally that how we teach what we believe matters. We have to be intentional about passing on faith. That we have, whether it's in our family, with our children, with our godchildren, with our nieces, nephews, grandparents, whether it's with our siblings. It doesn't just happen by osmosis. It's something happens by osmosis. That's called the Holy Spirit. But the real understanding of what it is that we believe has to be intentionally communicated. We teach who we are. That's a famous phrase that Parker Palmer, a Quaker educator, has used often, but it's very true. If I were trying to say any of the things I'm saying this morning, and there was not integrity about what I'm saying and my life, and you're the judges of that, maybe there isn't, but if there is, the message is stronger. If there isn't, if I just stand here and tell you a lot of things that I believe about the church that are theoretical and you don't see my life attempting to live faithfully into those truths, then my message is hollow. You know that as preachers and lay leaders in congregations. You need to understand that we teach what we live, which is why we started with your stories of proclamation. Can you be attentive to what your life is proclaiming, for good or for ill, and begin to harness the resources of your lived proclamation to actually share with your neighbors and your friends the good news of Jesus Christ?
And I love that expression about living the song that we sing. That's just
great. Yeah, that was a beautiful example from Oxford. Faith formation is lifelong and church-wide, so do not feel that you in your particular congregation are doing it alone. God is at work, God goes before us, God is behind us, God is underneath us, above us, behind us, everywhere. What we need to know, though, is that we are intentional about it where we are. So it happens in our homes, it happens in our congregations, it happens in our gatherings like this, our summer camps, our work in the jails, our partnering with other denominations, with people of other faith traditions. But it is lifelong. Even when we do formal education well, we don't graduate from it. There are episodic periods of intensive focus, which are really important. A Lenten series is very important. But we don't stop learning about God because we're checking off, I finished that Lenten series on the Gospel of Mark. We move on and continue to integrate that in our everyday life. So we need to continue to teach and learn faith from the day we are born until the day we die. Christian mission requires Christian disciples. I said this at the beginning, but we talk about how to grow the church, we talk about evangelism, we talk about all the things we want the world to know about the church. If we're not really yet clear or comfortable with our identity as Christian disciples, it's very hard to convince people in a very busy world that's very consumer-driven, that has lots of other bells and whistles attracting their attention, to come and walk with us. So we have the interior work that we need to do that accompanies the exterior ministry that we live. Be intentional, and my best language for how we do this is to practice discernment. It's not about the programs. It's about listening to God, active with us in the places we find ourselves, and building on the strengths that God has given us. One of the most powerful congregations I have ever seen as a witness to the world was a tiny church in southeastern Minnesota, in Waukesha. There were 45 active members of that church. And there was one retired school teacher, John White, who was about 75. And he realized that the teenagers that were affiliated with that church had nobody looking out for them. And he said, I'm a retired teacher. I don't know anything about youth ministry, but I'm a teacher. I know something about the faith, and I like kids. He was a man with bad arthritic knees. He started meeting with the 2 kids that they had, who brought their friends, who brought their siblings. By the time I met John, they were bringing 10 teenagers to every diocesan youth event in the Diocese of Minnesota. 2 years later, 3 of those teenagers were on the vestry. One of them had a key to the church because he went by the church every day on his way to school, so he took care of the snow removal. He was the one that let repair people in, or people in who needed to have access to the building because he could get there more quickly. One of the young people played the organ. They thought they could never afford a musician again and discovered that this pianist had enough skill that he could learn to play the organ. By the time I left Minnesota to come out here to Virginia Seminary, that congregation had 45 active teenagers in the church on a regular basis. And John White is the reason that happened. It wasn't a program. He didn't ask me for a curriculum. He started loving the young people one by one. And so they listened together to God. What gifts do these young people we have here right now, what can they share? They mowed the lawn, they shoveled the snow, they read the lessons, and the adults were renewed. There are more adults in that congregation now too. So build on your strength, and please celebrate your successes. Try your hardest to notice where God is at work, and it's working. Don't sit and look at the glass and say, it's really empty. Examine the Benedictine tradition of asking God, of letting God be with you at the end of each day, and taking a chance to say, for what am I most grateful? And what do I regret? Is a great way for us to get at blessings that we have been given so that we can be a blessing